Hello, my name is Pacha and welcome back to another episode of Tiergarten Edelwald. This time finally with some animals again. I know my last video where we have been building these train cars, these train wagons, wasn't really watched by many of you. And I can totally see why, because of course we didn't build for any animal, we just built a train wagon. It's not the most entertaining thing in the world to watch on a Planet Zoo channel, but this time we are back with an animal using the train wagons, and as you already saw from the thumbnail and the intro and the title of this video, we are gonna build for one of the animals from the America's Animal Pack, in this case the Coyote or Coyote. I think there are a couple different pronunciations. The German one is also completely different because it's called Coyote, a strong emphasis on the O's there, but yeah, I will call it the Coyote, and it's one of the animals that I was really surprised that we are getting them. Because I wasn't really had them on my bucket list, but I'm not complaining about them. They're a cool little, carnivore, cool little dog animal. They're canines. They're a cool little canine, very classic American canine with a lot of cultural significance, especially for the Native Americans. So you can do a lot of cool stuff and habitats with them in that sense. But before we build for the Coyote themselves, we have to modify our train wagons from last week a little bit. And the first thing we do here is to add a ramp to make this train, or all of the train wagons, accessible for our guests. Of course, we have to keep in mind people in wheelchairs and other disabilities, or people that are just can't climb stairs really well. So we are building these ramps, which I hopefully didn't make too steep. I'm not an expert in this. I never really had any information about how steep they have to be, but I tried my best to make it as accessible as possible for all the people that can't use stairs. And yeah, we make these wagons accessible because these train wagons, I probably talked about it in the last video, but they will act as the viewing area for the guests. As I said in the last video, I was inspired by Wildlands Emmen, a zoo in the Netherlands, which I saw a couple of really cool videos of by Just Goron, who did a tour of this place and also did a couple of different habitats for it. And they have this train, or the couple of train wagons over there. They are passenger train wagons, not in my case, where they are goods train wagons, and they are basically like a poacher's hideout, and sit between, I think, an African exhibit and a South American exhibit. And you can go through there, look through the windows and things like that, see a bunch of education and information about poaching and things like that. And I really like this idea and felt it could be used here in our Mexican-American area, just with a freight train, with a goods train, in case, or in contrast to a passenger train. This also means we now have to connect these train bits so that the guests can walk between them. I'm not really happy about the connection points at this point. I will maybe, if I get around to it, I will maybe change them in the future, but definitely would like to use less planks here. These are the planks from the tropical pack, which I really use a bunch in my zoo and in general in my builds, because they are recolorable and look very good. But yeah, I would use less planks for that, just because it looks a little bit too cluttered. And what we also have to do is we have to close these areas off, because of course we have coyotes on the other side, and despite them being rather, they're not that big, or they are smaller than a wolf, but they're still fairly huge for canines. They are classified still as big canines or as large canines, in contrast to foxes, for example, which are considered small canines. But we of course have to keep them in and make it so that they can't get to the visitors, which probably wouldn't really like to have a coyote running between them and probably biting them. So we're adding these scrap metal barriers over here to block that access off. And the whole area, the whole idea of this habitat itself, you already saw it kind of into cinematic a little bit, is this little bit run-down scrap metal area, and with a rocky, mountainous passage in the background, and then we will have a mining entrance. The mining entrance, or the mine entrance, will serve as the access to the backstage for the coyotes. And then we have all these kinds of goods lying around, crates, barrels, log piles. So it looks like either a mining camp or just an old decrepit ghost town camp, with where maybe a freight train, a goods train derailed or something like that, or is not longer in use, and now it's claimed back by nature, back by the coyotes, to make it their home basically. And another thing we are not doing now is, of course, adding the guests visitor windows, the way for the guests to view the coyotes, and these are these windows where we just use a couple of the doors from the other side of the train wagon. We can just open these doors, lock them in place, and then put in some windows, which makes for a very unique viewing experience in my case, in my opinion. And I really liked how it turned out in the end. You will see more of it and more close up in the real-time part at the end of the video, which finally we also have again a real-time part at the end of the video. And of course this is also not something that happened last time. Next thing we do is closing up also the space under the train wagon, the space where the rails are, because these are also possible escape points for the dogs. And here again we use a lot of scrap metal, a lot of metal to make it look rustic, to make it look run down. But of course they are maintained, they are checked every now and then to make sure there are no gaps in there, there's no damage in there, so that the coyotes can't escape. And we also put down concrete near the barriers, because coyotes love to dig. They are very capable diggers, so there would be a possibility of them escaping through a tunnel or something like that. So we put down these concrete barriers beneath them, so to make it impossible for them to escape. Now, while we are doing that now, and then I think we will go over to all the other barrier types in this enclosure, I quickly want to talk about the size of this enclosure, because it took me quite a while to decide on the right size for them. Of course, since they are close related to wolves and other canines, they need a lot of space. Our canines need a lot of running space and walking space, so that they can fulfill their natural need of traveling and patrolling their environment, which is totally fair and totally good to keep that in mind. But of course, we are also working here with a limited space. This is a city zoo, they don't have all the space in the world, so I needed to find the perfect space, or the ideal space to animal ratio for them, to not make it feel cramped, to give them enough space, yada yada yada. You know what I did? I looked up care manuals. And while I didn't find a specific care manual for coyote care, I found one for large canine care. And before I found this care manual, I didn't even know that coyotes are considered large canines. I would also always consider them as small canines, similar to foxes and things like that, but they're considered large canines. And as with the skunk care manual, or the mustard care manual, I have linked the care manual down in the description of this video. So if you want to look up yourself, if you need some more real life inspiration, some realistic inspiration for keeping canines of all sorts, wolves, maned wolves, African wild dogs, coyotes, they should all be mentioned in that care manual. I think it is officially from the AZA, so from the Associations of Zoos and Aquariums. And in that care manual there was also a list, not specifically for coyotes, but for large canines in general, except maned wolves, because they are really large canines. There was a size chart, a dimensions chart for how much space these animals will need. And I am referring this from my head now. I don't have the actual numbers here on screen so that I can read them, so I'm going from my memory. And I think it was for a non-breeding pair, so for two animals for that don't breed or that are not meant to breed, there is recommended a space for large canines in general of, I think I found 550 to 600 square meters, except of course main wolves, they always need a little bit more. But yeah, this was for a non-breeding pair. And for a breeding pair or multi-generational group of canines, so members of the same family breeding over generations, mothers, grandmothers, grandpas, and things like that, with the offspring, I think it was around 900 to 1,000 square meters that they would need in the at least space, basically. And with every additional member, there was, of course, an additional size requirement for them. And of course, these are between 550 to 950 was the size range I was working with. We have two coyotes in this enclosure, a male and a female. And while, of course, they are not currently breeding in this game at the moment, in my game at the moment, of course, there would be the possibility of breeding them. And so I opted for a size between these two, between the non-breeding size requirement and the breeding size requirement. And so I went with, I think it's around 750, 770 square meters, which is bigger than the non-breeding requirement, but smaller than the breeding requirement. And I felt like in the dimensions of the whole exhibit and the zoo, I think that was the ideal space. So keep in mind, I'm doing my research on these as good as I can. I'm looking up these things to make sure my habitats have the right sizes, they are good for these animals. There is a lot of research involved in this before I even start building the habitat or planning the habitat. And in terms of planning, I didn't really have a plan for this habitat. This was not inspired by anything I saw in real life, except from the train cars. So this is totally my own interpretation of what coyote exhibit could look like. You saw me building, you now see me building the Rockwork over here with the 4 rocks, and you saw me building this little cave just a second ago, which is for the coyotes to take shelter during rain or when they want to sleep. And we also have a window over there so the guests can look into this little shelter. And then the other cave we're building here right now at the moment is the entrance to the backstage, which we will design kind of like an old mine entrance from the Wild West, something like that. I really like that idea of having a mine entrance there. And what it also allows me is to place more train tracks in the exhibit, which I think is a really cool idea. I saw that in a couple of zoos, actually, that I saw, not for coyotes, but for animals in general, American animals, that you have these train tracks going through the exhibit to kind of add another little bit of decoration, of immersion into it. That is really something that was inhabited by humans and is now used by the animals. And I think it looks really cool. Let us see that we modify the train tracks from the train wagons to make it a little smaller, so it could fit for a mine lore or things like that, a mine wagon. And if you want to build a mine wagon that I can use, you can find my train tracks on the workshop. The link is in the last video, and then you can find my train tracks. These I use now. You see it now. Are just a little bit smaller. I use, I think, the 2-meter log here, the 2-meter rustic log from the Twilight pack. So that should be your size reference. And then if you want to build me a mine wagon that fits on these train tracks, go ahead, build them. I would love to do that. And we could place it right here, what you saw just in a second ago. That is where the train tracks leave the habitat and go into the visitor area. And this is something that is called habitat immersion, in contrast to reverse habitat immersion. And habitat immersion basically means that you bring the habitat out to the visitor area, that you immerse the visitors into the habitat, whereas reverse habitat immersion is basically that you bring the visitor area into the habitat, be it that you put a piece of path going through the habitat or other things that are from the mainly for the humans, that you bring them into the habitat to reverse that immersion. So really cool ideas that I got from a couple of zoos that do that. In this case, we have the habitat immersion, so we bring the train tracks from the inside of the habitat out to the visitor area, and I will later add in. We later added in the live stream last Friday. We added also a ramp over this train track so that people can, with wheelchairs, can go over them. But why should they go over them? What is on the other side of this habitat? Because at the moment there's nothing. There's just a wall of rocks and fences. Now I think I talked about it. I don't know if I talked about it in the last video. Probably not. But the whole idea is that this is a panorama habitat. Now, what is a panorama habitat? If you are familiar with the Zoo of Hamburg, also called Hagenbeck Zoo, after its founder, Dr. Hagenbeck, he pioneered a habitat technique or a habitat layout, a zoo layout called panorama exhibits. Panorama exhibits means that you have multiple habitats behind each other that you can see from the first habitat in that row. So, for example, they have the African panorama in the Zoo of Hamburg, where you first have a flamingo exhibit. Behind that, you have an African savanna for hoofstock animals, and then behind that, you have the lion exhibit. And I think behind even that, you have an exhibit for mountain hoofstock. So there's a mountain for ibex and things like that. And you can see all these habitats, all these 4 habitats, you can see them behind each other in one view if you're standing in front of the flamingo habitat. There's of course modes between them, there's paths between them, but it's laid out in a way that you don't see these modes and paths of things like that and barriers. So it looks like it's one continuous panorama of an African savanna, African wildlife area. Which is super cool. There's also, I also have a similar one for their Arctic area, and I will try to do something similar, just on a smaller scale here. Which meaning we have the coyote habitat in the foreground, with these more mining town area as more human settlement elements, and then we have this rock wall. And behind that habitat for the coyotes, there will be a path that you won't be seeing from the visitor area. If you're looking through the windows of the train, you won't see them. But behind that will be a habitat for another animal that lives on rocky terrain. So people who may know a little bit about American wildlife maybe can guess what animals this will be. But in the best case, if everything works out, you will be able to see these animals from the viewing point of the coyote guest viewing. So from inside the train, you will be able to see the coyotes as well as seeing the animals that live behind them. As I said, I'm hoping it works out. It's already planned out in my head. Now I just need to work in game, as we know. So getting something to work in game can sometimes be a little bit difficult, but I will try my best. And you will still see next week when if everything goes right. You will see it next week and see if it worked out. But yeah, back to the habitat itself. We are now building a couple of more decoration. You saw me placing all these barrels down and crates, and now we're also including some of the enrichment items. And I was really happy that I managed to squeeze in this the beaver pool, actually, the beaver dam pool, which is also usable by canines as a swimming pool or water pool. They jump around in it and splash around, and it's really cool that I managed to include it into this area, so it looks like there's a little bit of a waterfall or a little of a spring going from the mountains into this little pool over there, which the dogs can then use to splash around, have a good time, things like that. But yeah, I will now leave you to the rest. Oh, one thing more, because before I leave you to the rest, you already can kind of spot in the background, you can see a backstage building, but you never actually saw me building a backstage building. That is because I cut it out, the part where I built this backstage building, because it was nothing fancy. There's no inside area for the dogs at the moment, and the building itself was just a bunch of plaster walls with some metal bars and then a green grassy roof on top. Nothing special, so you saw me doing things like that a couple thousand times now if you follow my channel. So I cut it out, the backstage building, and doing our live stream last Friday, we actually upgraded this backstage building. We made it a little bit more immersive. You will see that in the real-time part at the end. So I just cut it out because I will show you a totally different, well, partially different looking backstage building in the real-time part very soon, so that you are not confused why it looks totally different now And yeah, it also saves me a little bit of time in this video that it would have been spent on something that is not really important for the entirety of this build. But yeah, I will now leave you with the last couple minutes with some nice music while we are now finally doing the finishing touches on this exhibit with all the decorations and plants and foliage and things like that. And I see you then in the real-time part and hope you enjoyed the video so far. And now with the speed build over, we are here in our real-time part. And before we look at our finished Coyote exhibit, we have to do some naming, or at least one name. And I'm really sorry about the person who suggested that name, because they suggested it all the way back with the Saki habitat. So I think 3 weeks or so ago, and because of my sickness, I never really came around of doing that. So I'm totally sorry for forgetting about naming the animal that they suggested, and that suggestion came from our old friend, that Aussie bloke, a wonderful member of this community, who asked if we could name the male binturong Bintang after the Malayan word for star, which is also reminiscent of their nocturnal nature. And they also added a little fun fact, namely that the name Bintang was the name of a beer brand in Bali, and this is one of the most popular beers over there, or it was one of the most popular beers when they visited Bali. So a little bit of a fun fact over here. So here we have our binturongs, and this is our male, and now we name him Bintang, which is very similar to binturong, so I'm wondering if there is some correlation between these two words. But yeah, with that out of the way, let's jump over to our Mexican, South American, North American area. Let's change the time of day again a little bit, and let's plop down right here on our playground, not on the playground. Let me go down. Thank you very much. And we start probably from this side of the exhibit and go through there, because you can also go around. So let's do that. And of course, before we can see the coyotes, we have to go up through the train, where I added a lot of more crates and piles of goods here over there to really make a bit of a more immersive space. So I added lots more goods and things that the train could be transporting. And here we have our first viewing window, where we also see one of the coyotes passed out from all the food that they just ate. We can also get a look at the pool over there. Let me change the time of day, because then we can see them better, like that. You can also see their foraging pool, or the pool, and then the entrance to their backstage with the mine entrance with the danger sign, of course, very classical mine stuff. And you can see the backstage building in the background, which just now has the same Casita Castello building on top of it, which is just it's just a a backdrop basically to make it look more immersive and more part of the whole ensemble basically. I will show it you later when we get to there. Moving on, we can go to the second train wagon where we can also look out here. Of course, we have some barriers so that the kids and people don't fall through here and onto the ground below. And we get another viewing opportunity over here of the rest of the habitat with a little shack over there with the piles of logs and another sleeping coyote. They're both sleeping as animals normally do when you're visiting a zoo. And while I tried to embark the desert scenery or the desert feeling with these more sandy underground and sparse grass and these little cacti plant basically things, I also tried to get in that we are still in a temperate biome with more temperate plants. We have this tree over here. We have these plants growing down the rocks in the background. We have, of course, the normal trees in the background. So it's a mixture between the more desert feeling and this more normal temperate zoo feeling over here, which is something I see in a lot of zoos that try to emulate desert exhibits in our climate via their work with a lot of sand and things like that, but of course the normal nature still creeps in and makes it self-visible. I also really like the train tracks that going through the entire habitat. They can cross them, not going through the barrier here, they can cross them just fine, so there's no problem with that, and it really adds to the immersion of this being an old train mining settlement, basically something like that. Our last viewing video over here, where you can get a nice look at the coyotes, which looks fantastical, by the way. I haven't mentioned that. And let's go down on this side. We end up near the skunk exhibit and our Sakis over there. And then we can follow the path over here, where we get to the point where the train tracks leave the exhibit and go through the glass under this little ramp for guests and into the bushes. Where they would go somewhere. People can think themselves where they would go if there would not be a barrier over here. But this is actually the zoo barrier itself. So this is the end of the zoo. Behind there is the outside, the park that surrounds the zoo. So we are on the edge of the zoo once again. If you follow now this path, there's nothing really on this side yet. As of course, I already talked about what our plans for that are. But if we follow this path, we get to the rocky areas. And then we get to this little cave area over here, as I said, where they can take shelter if they want to. Now following this path, going a little bit faster over here, if we go around, we have this part of the backstage, which is similar to, or still the same when I first built it. And then if you go around here, we have basically this facade of another, Mexican style home over here, which is the entrance to the backstage area. But there's nothing in here, it's totally empty yet. Maybe I will come around and building an inside interior for this backstage, but for now I will leave it like that. And if we then go around here, we are back to our food court with very loud music and our playground. And then we are basically back again, did the round and back again on the habitat for the coyotes, which are now awake, which is very cool. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you liked this speed build, and then I hope I see you in the next episode again. And until then, I hope you stay safe, you have a great time, and bye bye everyone.